Every single spring, I watch gardeners make the same expensive mistake. And I am not talking about buying the wrong plant or planting too early. I am talking about something that happens before you even dig a hole. You empty your containers, you look at that tired, compressed potting mix at the bottom, and you dump it. You throw it in the trash, you scatter it in the backyard, or you just toss it into the woods. And then you drive back to the garden center, you pull out your wallet, and you pay anywhere from $14 to $22 for a fresh bag of potting mix to start all over again. Let me tell you something. That soil you just threw away was not garbage. It was an asset, and every season you dump it, you are paying a penalty you do not have to pay. I have been growing in containers for over 25 years, and I want to be straight with you today. Everything you have been told about needing fresh soil every single year is one of the most quietly profitable myths the bagged soil industry has ever sold to the American gardener. Today, I am going to show you 7 specific, practical reasons why experienced growers never throw out old potting soil, and I am saving the most surprising one for number 5, because it will completely change how you think about starting seeds. Before we go any further, drop your US state or your USDA hardiness zone in the comments right now. I want to know exactly where this community is growing, and it helps me put the right content in front of people who actually need it. Reason 1. It saves you real, measurable money. Let me start with the math. And I want you to do this math slowly, because most people hear these numbers and let them slide right past without actually sitting with them. The average, serious container gardener, someone with a back porch, a patio, maybe a small deck is typically running somewhere between 10 and 20 containers at any given time. Could be more. If you have a raised bed and a few hanging baskets thrown in, you could easily be looking at the equivalent volume of 30 or 40 gallons of potting mix across your whole setup. Now, at current retail prices, a 2 cubic foot bag of mid-grade potting mix runs you between $14 and $22 depending on your region and where you are buying it. A premium mix with added mycorrhizae, slow-release fertilizer, and perlite, you are looking at $24 to $30 a bag, easily. If you are managing 10 to 15 containers of any real size and you are replacing all of that soil every spring, you are spending between $150 and $300 before you have bought a single plant every year for the rest of your gardening life. Now here is what I want you to think about instead. A gardener who refreshes and reuses their existing soil, and I am going to walk you through exactly how to do that safely later in this video, is spending maybe $30 to $40 on amendments to bring that old soil back to life. We are talking a small bag of compost, some worm castings, a handful of perlite, maybe a little slow-release fertilizer. That is it. You are cutting your annual soil budget by 70 to 80%. Over 10 years, that is potentially $2,000 you keep in your pocket instead of handing it to a garden center. And that is a conservative estimate. Nobody at the garden center is going to tell you this. They profit every single time you dump that soil and come back for a fresh bag. I am not selling you anything here. I am just telling you the truth. The strategy is simple. Stop treating old potting soil like a disposable product. It is not. It is a renewable resource. And the gardeners who figured that out a long time ago are the ones with the nicest containers on the block who seem to spend the least amount of effort getting there. Reason 2. Old soil is alive with beneficial microbes that took years to build. This is where I need you to pay very close attention, because this is the part of the story the bagged soil industry would prefer you never think too hard about. When you buy a brand new bag of potting mix, even an expensive one, what you are largely getting is a sterile, or near-sterile, growing medium. Peat moss, perlite, a little bark, sometimes some fertilizer pellets, and not a whole lot else. It is structurally adequate for growing plants, but it is biologically empty. There is almost nothing alive in there when you first open that bag. And that matters enormously, because the most productive, most disease-resistant, most nutrient-efficient growing environment is not a sterile one. It is a biologically rich one. Now think about what happens to your potting soil over the course of a single growing season. The roots of your plants begin secreting compounds into the surrounding soil. We call this the rhizosphere. Mycorrhizal fungi start to colonize those roots. Specific strains of plant growth-promoting bacteria move in, including species of Bacillus and Pseudomonas that produce their own natural antifungal and antibacterial compounds. These organisms begin a process of breaking down organic matter, cycling nutrients, making phosphorus and nitrogen available to your plant in forms it can actually absorb. In other words, your old soil is not depleted, it is populated. It has become a living biological community that took an entire growing season or more to develop. And when you dump that soil and buy a fresh sterile bag, you are starting from zero. Again, the old soil you are throwing away is acting as what soil scientists call a biological inoculant. Retaining it means you carry that microbial community forward into the next season. Your new transplants plug into an already active soil ecosystem. They establish faster, they resist fungal diseases more effectively, and they access nutrients with less effort, which means stronger root systems earlier in the season. Now, I do want to be honest with you. There are situations where you should not reuse old soil, and I am going to cover all of that in detail a little later in this video. If a plant in that container had a serious fungal disease, root rot, or a heavy aphid infestation last season, its soil needs to be handled differently. But that is the exception, not the rule. And knowing the difference is exactly the kind of information nobody at a garden center will volunteer, because if they told you, you would not be buying as much. Reason 3, it is the perfect structural base for deep containers. Here is something every experienced container gardener figures out eventually, usually after they have wasted a small fortune. Most annual vegetables and flowering plants, the ones most of us are actually growing: tomatoes, peppers, zinnias, petunias. Herbs have root systems that stay almost entirely within the top 6 to 12 inches of their growing container. They do not send roots all the way down to the bottom of a deep planter. That bottom 12 to 18 inches of soil, your plants are largely ignoring it. So here is the question I want you to sit with for a second. Why are you filling the entire depth of a 24-inch or 30-inch container with expensive premium potting mix if your plants are only using the top layer? The answer is, you should not be. And this is where old potting soil becomes genuinely valuable as a structural filler. Here is the technique. Take your deep planter, your raised bed with extra depth, your large decorative urn that you love but that costs a fortune to fill. Load the bottom third to half of that container with your old potting soil. It does not need to be nutrient-rich down there. It does not need to be perfectly aerated, it just needs to occupy space and provide some drainage capability, which old potting soil absolutely still does. Then, you top the container with 8 to 12 inches of your fresh, premium compost or new potting mix, the high-quality stuff that you reserve exclusively for the root zone where it actually counts. I want to be straight with you about the math here too, because this technique alone can cut your annual soil purchase by 30 to 50% on large containers. If you have a 20-gallon fabric pot, you are filling the bottom 10 gallons with reclaimed soil and the top 10 gallons with fresh mix. You just cut your premium soil purchase in half on that single container. Some experienced growers also drop a layer of burlap, newspaper, or even a few sheets of cardboard between the old soil base and the fresh top layer to create a soft physical boundary. It is not strictly necessary, but it gives you a visual guide when you are emptying and refilling containers in future seasons, so you always know exactly where the refreshed zone starts. Do not skip this step if you are working with large containers. It is one of the single most cost-effective techniques in container gardening, and almost nobody talks about it. Hold on. Before we get to number 4, I want to ask you something directly. How much money have you spent at the garden center in the last 3 seasons? Replacing things that did not make it, buying bags of soil you probably did not need, or starting over every spring because nobody gave you a straight answer about what actually works? Add it up honestly. For a lot of people watching this video right now, that number is several $100s. Some of you, it is more than that. Hitting the subscribe button on this channel costs you absolutely nothing, $0, and every single week, This channel publishes content built entirely around helping you stop making the expensive mistakes that the gardening industry profits from. This is free, it is here every week, and it is made specifically for people like you, people in their 50s and 60s, who are tired of wasting time and money on advice that benefits the store more than it benefits the gardener. Hit subscribe now. It is the smartest free decision you can make for your garden today. Now let us keep going, because we are just getting to the good stuff. Reason for it. It is an outstanding ingredient for your compost pile. Now, I will be honest with you. Not all old potting soil is ready to go straight back into a container. Some of it is genuinely spent. The organic matter is broken down, it is compacted, it is dense, and it is not going to perform well as a primary growing medium. And when that is the case, which it sometimes is, especially with soil that has been through 2 or 3 seasons of heavy growing, the answer is not the trash can. The answer is the compost pile. Old potting soil is one of the most underrated ingredients you can add to a hot compost system, and here is why. When your potting mix is fresh, it contains perlite, vermiculite, and processed bark. Those are physical components. They do not break down the way organic matter does. Even after 2 or 3 seasons in a container, that perlite is still structurally intact. It is still doing exactly what it was always designed to do, creating air pockets and pathways for water to drain. When you add that old potting mix to your compost pile, those particles act as what soil scientists call physical scaffolding. They keep air channels open inside the pile. This matters enormously for composting efficiency. A hot compost pile, the kind that actually breaks down quickly, kills weed seeds, and produces the rich, dark, crumbly finished compost you want, is an aerobic process. It requires oxygen moving through the pile. Dense, heavy compost piles that compact on themselves go anaerobic. They get slow, they get sour, they stop heating up properly, and they produce an inferior product. Adding old potting soil with its built-in aeration particles directly addresses that problem. I have been layering spent potting mix into my compost piles for years, and the difference in how quickly the pile heats up and turns is noticeable. You are essentially giving the microbial workforce in your pile better working conditions. More air, better structure, and the already established microbial populations in your old soil are contributing beneficial organisms to the pile too. And then, 6 to 12 weeks later, when that compost is finished, you are going to spread it right back onto your containers and beds. The material completes a full cycle from container to compost and back to container. Nothing wasted, nothing purchased unnecessarily. That is the way professionals think about inputs, and it is exactly how you should think about your soil. Reason 5. It makes a near-perfect, weed-free seed covering. I promised you this one early, and I'm going to deliver. This is the one that genuinely surprises most gardeners, including experienced ones. And it is one of my favorite tricks for improving germination rates without spending an extra dollar. Here is the problem with direct seeding in the garden. When you sow slow germinating seeds like carrots, parsnips, or beets directly into the soil, especially in heavy clay or compacted native soil, a surface crust can form between the time you sow and the time those seeds germinate. Rain hits the bare soil, soil particles compact, and suddenly you have a physical barrier between your seedling and the open air. Tiny seedlings often cannot push through it. You get irregular germination, gaps in your rows, frustration. The traditional fix is to cover your seeds with a fine, light material that stays loose, retains moisture without waterlogging, and does not form a crust. And nurseries will happily sell you bags of seed starting mix or vermiculite for exactly this purpose. But here is what I want you to think about. As potting soil ages through 1 or 2 growing seasons, its coarser organic particles, the chunks of bark, the partially decomposed fibers continue to break down. What you are left with is a very fine, highly stable, humus-like material. It has almost no large particles. And critically, it contains virtually no viable weed seeds, because any seeds that were in it have long since either germinated or lost viability. That aged, broken-down potting mix is one of the best seed coverings you can use for direct seeded crops in the garden. Spread it about a quarter to half an inch thick directly over your newly sown seeds. It stays loose enough that seedlings can push through without effort. It retains moisture and keeps your seeds hydrated through the critical germination window. And it does not introduce a new crop of weeds alongside your vegetables, which is exactly what a lot of garden soil does. Carrot gardeners especially. Listen to this. Carrots are notoriously inconsistent germinators, and moisture stress during germination is one of the primary reasons. A thin layer of aged potting mix over your carrot rows, kept lightly misted, can dramatically improve your germination percentage. I have seen it firsthand season after season. This is not a trick. It is just knowing what you have and using it intelligently. Let me tell you something honestly. The people working at your local garden center are generally helpful, and most of them genuinely like plants. But they work for a retail operation that is in the business of selling you things. They are not going to walk you through ways to spend less money at their store. They are not going to explain how to turn your old soil into a free seed starting amendment, or why your existing containers do not need a full fresh load of premium mix every spring. This information exists, but nobody at the places that profit from your gardening is volunteering it. And that is exactly why this channel exists. Think of one person in your life who you know spends money every spring at the garden center, a neighbor, a sibling, a friend from church who has a beautiful yard but who complains every summer about the cost. Send this video to that person right now. Just share the link. It takes 10 seconds, and it might genuinely save them hundreds of dollars this season. And if you are not subscribed yet, please do that right now too, because we do this every single week, and you do not want to miss what is coming next. Reason 6. It is highly effective for lawn patching and grade stabilization. This one is intensely practical, and I think most homeowners, not just gardeners, are going to find this valuable, because almost every yard in America, at some point, has problem spots. A depression where a dog has been digging, a low area where water pools after heavy rain, a bare patch near the driveway where the mower scalped the grade, or those ragged holes and tunnels left behind by moles that run a highway system right under your lawn. The standard fix most homeowners reach for is native topsoil from a bag or a bulk delivery. And while that can work, bagged topsoil from a big box store is notoriously inconsistent. Some of it is high quality. A lot of it is heavy clay or low-grade fill, or it comes loaded with weed seeds that will happily germinate right alongside your new grass. Every weed seed you introduce into a lawn repair becomes your problem for years. Old potting soil is actually a superior material for many lawn patching applications, and here is why. It is highly porous. It does not compact the way clay-heavy native topsoil does, which means it accepts and holds water during the critical early rooting phase of new grass. It is virtually free of weed seeds, which I cannot say about most bulk topsoil products. And the residual organic matter and perlite structure help new grass roots establish quickly because they are growing into a medium with good air circulation. The technique is simple. For shallow depressions, anything less than about 3 inches deep, add your spent potting soil in thin layers, tamping lightly between each layer. Scratch the surface, broadcast your grass seed of an appropriate cultivar for your region and light conditions, spread another thin layer of old potting mix over the top as a seed covering, and keep it consistently moist for 2 to 3 weeks. For deeper depressions, fill the majority with topsoil or compacted native soil and use the spent potting mix only for the top inch or two. I have used this technique on my own property for years, and the results are consistently better than reaching for a bag of generic topsoil. The grass establishes faster, the weed pressure is lower, and I am spending nothing on a material I already have sitting in a pile at the corner of my garage. Reason 7. It is a zero-cost medium for plant divisions and giveaways. This last reason might seem small until you think about it for a moment, and then you realize it connects to one of the most valuable habits in all of gardening. Dividing perennials is one of the most powerful, most cost-effective things any gardener can do. A single healthy clump of hostas, daylilies, asters, bee balm, or coneflowers given 2 or 3 years to establish can be divided into anywhere from 4 to 12 individual plants. At current retail prices, a single 1-gallon hosta sells for $9 to $16 at most garden centers. A 3-year-old clump divided into 8 sections represents $60 to $130 in retail value from a plant you already own, using nothing but a garden fork and a little time. Now, when you divide those plants to share with neighbors, family members, community garden groups, or local plant swaps, which I strongly encourage, because it builds goodwill, and you often get divisions in return, you need something to pot those divisions into temporarily. They need to go home in a container with some growing medium so they can survive the transition. Using premium new potting mix for giveaway plants is a complete waste. These are temporary vessels. The plant is going to be in that pot for maybe a week or 2 before someone plants it in the ground. It does not need fresh, expensive mix. It needs something that provides structure, holds a little moisture, and keeps the roots alive during transport. Old potting soil is absolutely perfect for this purpose. It has enough residual aeration and organic structure to keep a freshly divided perennial in good shape for a week or 2. It is free. And it means that when you do your spring and fall perennial divisions, which you should be doing every 2 to 3 years, for most clumping perennials, you are not incurring any additional cost to turn one plant into 8 or 10. The gardeners who are consistently the most generous, who show up to plant swaps with flats of divided perennials, who send their neighbors home with hostas and daylilies and bee balm, are almost always the same people who have figured out how to make their existing resources go further. Old potting soil is part of that equation. If you are still watching this video and you are not yet subscribed to Hope Garden, I need you to understand something about how YouTube actually works. The algorithm does not consistently put content from channels you are not following into your feed. It shows you videos from channels it recognizes you actively engage with and follow. If you do not subscribe right now, there is a very good chance you will not see the next video we put out, and you will not see the one after that. YouTube will move on and assume you are not that interested. This channel is here every single week with this kind of specific, practical, money-saving information content built specifically for experienced homeowners who want real answers and not just pretty pictures of plants. Hit the subscribe button. It is free. It takes 2 seconds. And it guarantees that what we put out every week keeps finding its way to you. Now, let us get into the most important part of this video, because knowing why to save your old potting soil is only half the story. The other half is knowing exactly how to do it safely and correctly, and this is where I am going to give you a real system, step by step. Let me be completely clear about something before we walk through this. Reusing old potting soil is not a blind exercise. It is not a matter of just dumping last year's container back into a fresh pot and hoping for the best. Done right, refreshed potting soil performs as well as or better than fresh bagged mix. Done carelessly, it can transmit disease, harbor pests, and give you a frustrating season that you will be tempted to blame on yourself. The difference is in the process. And the process is not complicated. It just requires a little attention and about 30 minutes of work per season. Step 1: inspect and clean the soil thoroughly. The first thing you do when you empty a container at the end of the season or when you are pulling things out in early spring to refresh your setup is get down and actually look at what you have. Pull out every visible root. Do not leave partial root systems buried in the soil. Old roots decompose, but during that decomposition process, they temporarily lock up nitrogen, a phenomenon called nitrogen immobilization, that your new plants would otherwise be able to use. It is not a permanent problem, but it slows things down when you are trying to get transplants established in the spring. Pull the roots, all of them. Remove any fallen leaves, debris, or old mulch that ended up in the pot over the season. These can harbor fungal spores and insect eggs. Now, here is the most important inspection step that most people skip. Smell the soil. I know that sounds overly simple, but it tells you an enormous amount. Healthy soil, even old, spent potting soil smells like the earth. It smells like the forest floor after rain. There is something almost pleasant about it, a kind of deep, organic, mineral scent. That smell tells you the biological activity in the soil is aerobic, meaning oxygen-loving, Well-functioning microbial communities are doing their job. If the soil smells sour, foul, like sewage, or like vinegar, that is a problem. That odor indicates anaerobic bacteria have taken over the kind of bacterial activity that happens when soil is consistently waterlogged, oxygen-starved, or has been sitting sealed in a container with no drainage over a long wet season. That soil should not go directly back into a planting container. It either needs to be composted or sterilized, and I will explain exactly how to do that in a moment. There is also a category of old soil you should never reuse directly, no matter how good it looks or smells. If the plant that grew in that container last season had a visible fungal disease, think late blight on tomatoes, powdery mildew on squash, or any situation where you saw white, gray, or rust-colored fungal coating on your plant, those fungal spores can survive in the soil and infect whatever you plant next season. Similarly, if that container had a severe aphid infestation or root-feeding insects like fungus, gnat larvae, or vine weevil grubs, that soil carries risk. Either compost it, a properly hot compost pile will kill most pathogens, or use the solarization method I am about to describe. Step 2. Sterilize only when necessary, and know what you are trading. I want to be very deliberate about this, because sterilization is sometimes necessary and sometimes counterproductive. When it is necessary, do it. When it is not, skip it, because sterilization is a blunt instrument. It kills the harmful organisms you want to eliminate, but it also kills the beneficial microbial communities you have been reading about for the last several minutes. You are resetting the biological clock. Sometimes that is the right trade. Often it is not. The safest and most practical sterilization method for home gardeners is solarization. Moisten the soil not soaking wet, just thoroughly damp and seal it in a black plastic bag or a dark, sealed plastic container. Set it in the hottest, most direct sun location you have. In most of the country, doing this through July and August in full summer sun will generate internal temperatures of 140 to 180 degrees Fahrenheit, which is sufficient to kill most fungal pathogens, weed seeds, and insect eggs. Leave it for 4 to 12 weeks depending on your summer intensity and how serious the contamination was. In USDA zones 8 through 11, 4 weeks in full summer sun is typically adequate. In zones 5 through 7, aim for 6 to 8 weeks to be thorough. If you need a faster result, say, you are dealing with early spring and you want to get containers going before the weather cooperates with outdoor solarization, you have 2 indoor options. Spread the moist soil in a thin layer on a metal baking tray and place it in an oven preheated to 180 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes. Do this with your kitchen windows open. It does produce a soil smell that some people find unpleasant, and it is not a subtle process. Your family will know, but it works. Alternatively, for small batches, microwave the moist soil on the highest power setting for 90 seconds. This kills pathogens effectively in a small quantity. Again, use this for genuinely compromised soil only. After any sterilization method, you will need to re-inoculate the soil with beneficial organisms before planting. The biological community has been reset. Add worm castings, compost, or a commercial mycorrhizal inoculant to bring the beneficial microbes back before you put a new plant in there. Step 3. Loosen and correct the physical structure. Old potting soil compacts. There is no way around this. Over the course of a growing season, root pressure, watering, and the natural breakdown of organic particles causes the growing medium to become denser and less porous. If you have ever noticed that your container soil looks like it has dropped 2 inches since you first planted, that compression is exactly what happened. And compressed soil means reduced oxygen in the root zone, which slows root growth and reduces the efficiency of your plant's water uptake. The fix is straightforward. Break up every clump you can find in the old soil. Use your hands, a trowel, or a hand cultivator, and work through the material until it is loose and friable again. Then add perlite, pumice, or coarse horticultural sand to restore the aeration that has been lost. The ratio I use and recommend is 10 to 15% by volume. So if you have a 5-gallon bucket of old potting soil, You are adding roughly half a gallon to 3/4 of a gallon of perlite. Work it in thoroughly. I prefer perlite for most container work because it is lightweight and essentially permanent. It does not break down the way vermiculite does over repeated seasons. For raised beds and larger containers where weight is less of a concern, coarse pumice is excellent and has a slightly more natural appearance if the surface of the soil is visible. Do not skip this step. I see gardeners who go through the effort of saving their old soil, amending it with good compost, and then wondering why their containers still underperform. Often the answer is compaction. The roots cannot breathe, and a plant that cannot breathe at the root level cannot grow efficiently no matter how much fertilizer or water you apply. Step 4. Replenish nutrients and restore biological life. This is the core of the refresh process, and it is where your old potting soil goes from spent to genuinely productive. Old soil has not lost its structure. It has not lost its aeration capacity, or you just restored that in step 3. What it has lost is its available nutrient reserves, particularly the soluble nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium that plants consumed over the previous season, and to a lesser extent, the slow-release reserves from whatever fertilizer was incorporated when the soil was new. The most effective amendment strategy for refreshing old potting soil combines a fast-acting biological source of nutrients with a slow-release structural amendment. Here is my personal standard refresh formula. For every 3 parts of old potting soil, I work in 1 part of finished compost or worm castings. Worm castings are particularly effective here because they contribute not just nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, and micronutrients, but also extraordinarily dense populations of beneficial bacteria and fungi. A single handful of quality worm castings contains billions of organisms. You are essentially re-inoculating the entire soil volume just by working them in. They also have an almost miraculous ability to suppress common soil pathogens through a combination of competitive exclusion and the natural antibiotics produced by the organisms they contain. If you want to use a ratio formula that gives you more growing power, especially for heavy-feeding crops like tomatoes, peppers, or squash in containers, try a 50-50 blend of old potting soil and fresh compost. At that ratio, the compost is contributing enough nutrients, biological activity, and organic structure to essentially turn your old soil into a nearly fresh-performing medium. For slow-release mineral nutrition, I add a small amount of granular organic fertilizer, something like a 4-4-4 or 5-5-5 formula worked into the top several inches of the mix. This provides a steady, low-level supply of the basic macronutrients over the first 6 to 10 weeks of the new season, which covers the critical establishment period. If your old soil is running on the acidic side, which potting mixes naturally tend toward after a season or two, especially if you have been using acidifying fertilizers or growing acid-loving plants, a light application of agricultural lime or dolomitic lime will bring the pH back toward the neutral range of 6.2 to 6.8, where most vegetables and flowering annuals perform best. You do not need much. A tablespoon per gallon of soil is typically sufficient for a moderate pH correction. If you are unsure of your soil's pH, a basic, inexpensive pH meter from a garden or hardware store will give you a reading in 30 seconds. Step 5. Let it rest before you plant. This is the step that distinguishes a professional approach from a casual one, and it costs you nothing except a little patience. After you have cleaned the soil, corrected the structure, and worked in your amendments, do not plant immediately. Moisten the entire mixture to approximately the consistency of a wrung-out sponge, damp throughout but not dripping, and seal it in a container or plastic bag for a minimum of 1 week. 2 weeks is better. 3 is ideal if your timing allows for it. What you are doing during this rest period is allowing moisture to distribute evenly through the entire volume of soil. Dry pockets and wet pockets self-correct. More importantly, you are giving the microbial community time to stabilize and begin multiplying in the amended environment. The organisms from your worm castings and compost are establishing their populations, finding their niches in the soil structure, and beginning to cycle the nutrients you have added into plant-available forms. When you plant into a rested, biologically active mix, Your transplants are moving into a thriving community that is ready to support them. When you plant into a freshly mixed but unrested medium, the biology is still settling, and your plants are the first test subjects. I do this every spring for my containers. I mix my refreshed soil in early to mid-March, seal the buckets, set them in the garage, and they are ready to go by the time I am starting my warm season transplants in late April or early May. It becomes part of the rhythm of the season. Step 6. Store it correctly through the off-season. One final piece of this system, and it applies specifically to gardeners in zones 3 through 7 who have a real off-season where containers come in or sit dormant through winter. Do not leave old potting soil sitting in open containers through the winter. An uncovered pile of moist potting mix is an open invitation for fungus gnats to lay eggs, for ants to colonize, for mice or other small animals to burrow in, and for unwanted weed seeds to blow in and get established. Seal it. Use the buckets you emptied your containers into, airtight plastic bins, or well-tied heavy-duty garbage bags. Label them so you know what they are in the spring. Now, here is a technique that I genuinely love for cold climate gardeners. If you have an unheated garage, a shed, or even just an exposed area where temperatures stay consistently below freezing for several weeks through the winter, store your sealed containers of old potting soil there. The prolonged freezing and thawing cycle through a northern winter will naturally kill a significant percentage of fungus, gnat larvae, aphid eggs, and other overwintering pest populations that may have taken up residence in your soil. This is free pest control. You are using the climate as a tool, and it is extraordinarily effective. Come spring, bring the soil in, let it thaw, and proceed with the refresh process I have just walked you through. You will have clean, structurally sound, already starting to biologically activate soil ready to go before your garden center has even set up its seasonal display. Let me bring this together. Every week, Hope Garden puts out content built around one single goal: helping real American gardeners grow better plants in real homes with a real budget. No fluff, no products I am being paid to recommend, no sponsored content, just the information that is actually useful, delivered without the sugarcoating you get at the garden center. Today, we covered 7 specific, practical reasons why experienced growers never throw out old potting soil, from the direct dollar savings and the irreplaceable biological community living in your containers to its value as a structural base filler, a compost ingredient, a seed covering, a lawn patch medium, and a free propagation mix for the perennial divisions you should absolutely be making every 2 to 3 years. And then we walk through the complete step-by-step system for refreshing that soil safely. Inspecting it, correcting the structure with perlite, replenishing the nutrients with compost and worm castings, letting it rest, and storing it through the winter properly. That is a complete soil management system, and it costs you almost nothing. If you are in your 50s, 60s, or beyond, if you have spent enough springs replacing things that died and buying bags of soil you did not need, this channel is built for exactly you. Subscribe. It is free. It is here every single week, and the information we put out is the kind of information that actually changes how you garden for the rest of your life, not just for this one season. Now, I want to hear from you. Drop your U.S. state or USDA hardiness zone in the comments right now. Tell me which of these 7 reasons surprised you most, or tell me how much money you have been spending on potting soil every year. I read every comment. This community is real, it is growing, and every person who drops their zone helps me understand exactly where this audience is growing across America, so I can keep making content that speaks directly to your conditions. Go refresh that soil, not next week, this week, or even today.